Well, good morning, everybody, and congratulations on coming out on a Saturday morning. And look at that, the sun's almost coming out, which makes it even worse to be inside, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, I guess. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the basics around sales. Quick background on myself. I've been in sales and marketing for decades. I won't tell you exactly how many, but I started my career with Xerox, which is arguably one of the best sales and marketing companies in the world. I did a variety of jobs there. Then I moved into enterprise software. I spent a few years coaching and mentoring startups. I've been a mentor for New Ventures BC for, I think this is going on 7 years. And I've been participating in the Venture Acceleration Program, where I've met a couple of you before for the last couple of years. So what we're going to cover today, perfect. Here's the agenda. First, we're going to talk a bit about what is sales. Who do you sell to? Because that's really pretty important. How do you start making that initial contact? I'm going to introduce you to a tool which you may want to follow up on. Some of you might have heard of it, called spin selling. It's been around for a really long time, and it still works. And then finally, how do you build your funnel? And then I'll leave room at the end for questions. So without further ado, I'd like to start by asking somebody to volunteer. Somebody give me a definition of what do you think sales is? What is the definition of sales?
Put up your hand. I'll give you a microphone.
Mm-hmm. I see somebody. He looks like he's dying to give an answer. Lars.
Yeah. I think it's the process of bringing your product to the end user.
Okay. Thank you. Who else? Dave, back there.
Certainly the notion of a transaction, exchanging value, one form of value for another. Mm-hmm. But presumably there's some sort of enrollment or promotion process inside or implied by sales.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I saw another hand over here.
Sure, I'll give it a try. I think it's a process of convincing somebody that your product will solve their problem, like your product will bring value to them, and that what they'll pay for it will be worthwhile.
Okay, those are all really good thoughts, so hold those in mind as we go forward. Last chance. Anybody else want to contribute something? Okay, so let me give you a definition that is really quite basic and fundamental. And basically what that is, oh, here we go. Influencing the behavior of others. At the end of the day, when you're selling something to someone, you are influencing their behavior. And we're going to talk about why that's important, because one of the key things about sales is, particularly when you've got a really cool new product or solution and you're dying to bring it to market and you can't wait to talk to people about it, there's something to be said for being able to describe your value proposition and being eager to convey that. But the most important thing that I've found in about 30 years of selling to know about selling is that good salespeople, they have really big ears and they listen more than they talk. So one of the first things, particularly if you're new to selling, is to try and get the discipline of not wanting to rush in and talk about how great your product or solution is, but to really listen, to understand what the problems are that your potential clients are dealing with. And the issue, if you talk too quickly, is you start getting into things that you probably don't want to deal with at the beginning of a sales cycle, like, well, how much does it cost, and all those kinds of things, before you've actually really uncovered what the requirements are and see if there's a match between what that customer is looking for and what you actually have to offer. So I'd like to ask another question. Can someone give me an example of when they were sold to and they had a really great experience? Who's recently had a really good experience being sold to by someone? And if no one puts their hands up, it says really awful things about all of us professional salespeople. Think of something you bought recently where you had a really good experience with the salesperson. Caleb?
So
I'm supposed to describe the experience.
What was good about it? What did
What
you
was good
buy?
about it?
What was good about it?
I suppose I bought a bicycle,
Okay.
and what was good about it was the positivity of the salesperson. They were good at reinforcing the positive feelings I was expressing during my test ride, and they provided solutions to any technical barriers I was surfacing in evaluating the bike. They're like, oh, we can raise the seat post, for example, or we can swap out these components, or you'll have a complementary bike fitting, and this kind of thing. And then at the end of the process, they indicated that accessories are available for a 10% discount if you buy them with your new bike. But they offered to extend that for a month because I was undecided about what accessories I needed. So overall, I think that that was a good sales experience. And I would contrast that with their colleague, who was a little less positive and a little bit more coldly confirming, just saying like, yeah, good, yeah, and not really following up with the, I don't know, subtlety, I guess. In any case, that's sorry for the long story.
No, thank you. So if I understood you correctly, you felt, first of all, that you had more empathy with that other salesperson. He was able to establish a connection with you. And it sounds like when you raised some objections or brought up other problems, he was able to find solutions for you. Okay, cool. All right, good things to keep in mind. Why did you go looking for a bike in the first place? Why did you need a new bike?
Because I was changing my cycling habits and or ambitions, and I wanted a new bike to reach the next level of performance.
Cool. So in a nutshell, you had a problem with your existing bike, and you needed to find a solution. Okay. And ultimately, that's what we try and do as salespeople, is to help people find answers for problems. And it's not about flogging features, and it's not about talking about how cool it is or all the neat things you can do. At the end of the day, people will make buying decisions to solve problems. So let me ask, how many in here for your product or your service are in B2B space? Sure. Okay, great, most of you then, and a few in B2C, I guess? Or B2B2C? Okay. Great. So particularly when you're dealing with business people, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to keep that in mind. And as you're going through this process, as you're identifying what your unique selling proposition is, and when you look at ways to market it and present it, keep in mind that what you want to focus on is the way that you make things better for people. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit about how to continue to develop that. So probably the first thing to figure out is, who is it you're going to sell to? So let me just see a show of hands. Who here has identified who their target audience is in terms of who you want to go sell to? Great. So one of the things that I would recommend is that you understand who your ideal customer persona is and what the attributes are of that particular group. So this is an example that we use in my company. I should say, by the way, we're a mobile messaging company. We're an international company. We have offices in 52 countries around the world. We've grown in the last 4 years from about 300 people to nearly 1,100. And we supply text, voice, chat, and omni-channel communications to a variety of verticals around the world. And one of the things that we've been doing is identifying who exactly is it that we're going to sell to, and who are we most likely to have success selling to, and then what are the attributes of those folks. So we look at the firmographics, things like what industry are they in? Is it banking? Is it transportation? Is it hospitality? We look at the attributes of those industries as well. We figured out that we want to sell B2B2C or B2B. We think that there's a minimum revenue that our clients need to have before they'd be ready for a solution such as ours. So those are the kinds of firmographic data that we look at in terms of identifying where we want to sell. And particularly when you're new, and I would say I've worked in startups that had 6 people, 10 people, and companies that had 100,000. But when you're new and you find somebody who's interested, there's that, yeah, let's go sell to them. And that's okay for a while, particularly because it helps you learn. It helps you understand what value propositions resonate, which ones don't, why people buy and why they don't. But as you get bigger and bigger, particularly if you haven't initially got the resources to make huge investments in sales and marketing, it's really important to narrow your focus. And my favorite definition of strategy is about what you decide not to do. So things might look really attractive, but you've got to figure out where can you get the biggest bang for your buck with fairly minimal resources when you start, and understanding your ideal customer persona can help you to do that. We look at things at what geographies are they in, because part of our value proposition is that we're incredibly strong if you want to do messaging across borders. What kinds of messaging, and do they already use an SMS provider? So you might find that you want to look for someone who's already using something that your competitor, using one of your competitors, because you feel you've got a unique value proposition that's stronger than the competitors. So being able to identify that's important. And then behaviorally, how do they act? So for your business, it might be a good idea to put this together and really get an idea of who it is you want to go and sell to. So once you know sort of the companies that you want to go and sell to, then you need to figure out who inside those companies do you want to sell to. And there are all kinds of buying influences. Usually there's an economic buyer. My definition of the economic buyer, you might think it's the person who signs the contract or who pays the bills, but I think it's the person who can say no. So if you're dealing with someone and you think that you've got the decision maker for a particular sales cycle, but at the end of the day they say, you know, that's really great, I just got to run that by my boss, chances are you're not dealing with the economic buyer. And you may or may not ever get in front of that person, but it's important to know that they exist. It's important to understand who is in the buying group for your product or your service. So you tend to have an economic buyer. There may be a technical buyer. That's the person who validates that your solution ticks all the boxes in terms of what they're looking for. There could be a user buyer, the person who will actually use it. There can be an influencer, someone who is giving advice or has had previous experience buying a similar solution and is making recommendations to the folks in that buying group. You could also have saboteurs, and that's someone who doesn't really want you to be successful because for whatever reason there is some personal threat to them within the job. So the more you can identify those different buying influences and understand what their motivations are, the more likely you are to have a firm grip on what you need to do in order to be successful with that sales cycle. So once you've identified that, it's also interesting to understand who the persona are, because different persona within companies have different interests. So for example, in our company, we look for people who are interested in growing their customer base. And one of the ways they want to engage is by being able to do text messaging. Or it may be that they want people to sign up for their service and they do two-factor authentication, which means they have to be sent a one-time PIN code. That's the kind of thing that we do. And what our customers are interested in are conversion rates. So if I know that that's important to the head of growth or the head of customer experience, that's one of the things that I can emphasize when I'm talking to that person about why they might want to use our solutions. So, and the thing about personas, it's not necessarily about titles. You can have people who multiple titles for the same kinds of jobs across different companies. You'll just find out what they are with experience with going and talking to them. So this is an example of some of the buying influences that we look at. So we know who the influencers are, who the decision makers are, who the technical buyers are, and the more you can identify that, the better it is for understanding what your strategy is going to be when you try and approach somebody. The other reason why this is important is we live in a world today where people know all kinds of stuff about us. We were just talking about that a little bit earlier. It's actually kind of creepy, the amount of information that people know about us, complete strangers. And you've had this experience, I'm sure, when you're on a website and you're looking at something and all of a sudden an ad for that thing pops up for weeks and weeks later, right? Or someone calls you out of the blue and has information about you and they're trying to sell something to you. that's just kind of the world we're in. But you can also make use of that, and it's important because we get inundated, particularly decision makers, with communications from salespeople all the time. It's phone calls, it's emails. I don't know about you, but I get tons of them, and most of them I ignore. But the ones I don't ignore are the ones that have content that is relevant to me or references something that's important to me. So when you're thinking about how do you make that initial contact, it's worthwhile to do some research about the person you want to contact and find out what you can about them. You can look on LinkedIn, you can look on Twitter, you can look on their company website, you can look on, you can just Google search them and see what shows up. And it's amazing how much information you can get about people just by doing a Google search. An example might be you find out that the VP of marketing that you want to contact happens to be a long-distance runner because they put something about that on LinkedIn. And if you are also a long-distance runner, when you craft that initial message to them, you can make some reference to that. You can find something personal that you can reference in terms of getting their interest. And sometimes people will respond to you simply because they appreciate the fact that you did the work to find out a little something about them before you actually tried to get in contact. So when you're making that initial contact with someone, make your messages relevant and make sure that you've done your homework. So do the research. You can get understandings about people's psychology by what they posted on LinkedIn, on their blog posts. An example might be, if you're trying to talk again to a chief marketing officer, I haven't met too many chief marketing officers who didn't one day want to be a CEO. And they tend to be big picture strategic thinkers, right? And what are their biggest issues? If you're in marketing, you're trying to prove attribution to things. So some of these suppositions you can make just on the role that the person is in, and some you can make just by doing research on them and finding out what's important to them. And you can also get an understanding of, like if you're talking to, consistently talking to the same kinds of people in terms of selling your product, they tend to have the same kinds of problems. So you can use that in your conversations with them to try and get a sense of what's important to them and what they're looking for. The other thing is being real. It's being authentic when you're talking to people, whether that's in an email, whether it's on the phone, or whether it's in person. One of the ways that we connect with people and develop that empathy is by being authentic, is for looking ways to connect, looking for commonalities. And before I make a sales call for anyone, to talk to anyone, I always look them up on LinkedIn. I want to see, do they know someone I know? Did we go to the same university? Have we been in the same cities? Do they have any of the same interests? Do we follow the same groups? Looking for ways to make that connection and make it authentically. The other thing is, when you're communicating, you need to deliver value, and that comes back to how are you able to solve people's problems. So your initial communications, if you're reaching out through an email or a phone call, you want it to be short, you want it to be succinct, but you want to be something in there that's of value to them, such as, I understand in working with people in similar roles that attribution tends to be an ongoing problem. I'm wondering if that's something that you struggle with as well. Right? So you're going to really nail it down to something that would be important to them. And that comes back to understanding what your unique value proposition is, or what your unique sales proposition is for your market. And then the other thing is, and this is again at the beginning of a sales call or a sales process, ask for one thing. Whether it's an email or it's a phone call, that one thing might be a meeting, it might be a chance to connect on the phone, it might be a referral to somebody else in the organization. And see what happens. Now, when you actually get that meeting, wow, you got a meeting, now what? It requires planning, and I'm sure that everyone here knows that you would never go into a meeting without having thought about what it is you want to get out of it, what are the questions that you want to ask, what do you want to leave that meeting with. And one of the tools that I learned very early in my career at Xerox that people are still using today is spin selling. Anybody heard of that? Okay. Well, Spin Selling is a book that was written by a guy named Neil Rackham. And he went and he interviewed thousands and thousands of salespeople to try and get an understanding of what makes them successful. And what he found is that the most successful salespeople were the ones who listened and asked lots of questions, not the ones who talked and were pitching product and feature. And he put it into a sort of a systematic system that he calls spin selling. This book is available. You can actually get most of the content on the internet, but you can still buy it. The cover hasn't changed in 30 years. And it's like selling. Selling is simple, but it's not easy. So I'm going to show you just a little bit about what it stands for. So SPIN stands for situation, problem, implication, and need payoff. And these are all kinds of questions that you would ask a potential customer in a sales call. And what this basically does is through questioning, trying to get your customer to understand that they have a problem and that that problem is important enough that they should act on it. Okay? So if you look at this, this little chart, basically the situation, and I'll go into more detail into what each of these kinds of questions are, is the situation questions lead to problem questions. They might be implicit problems. You're trying to make them explicit. And you're trying to get the customer to understand what the implications are of that problem and of not doing something about it, and then thinking about, wow, how wonderful life would be if you could actually solve it. So that's spin. So the first questions, situation questions, these are the easiest, and often you can get a lot of this information before you even go in and see the customer. As I said, you can get this information from Google, from LinkedIn, from their company website, looking at their annual reports. It tells you stuff about the company and potentially about the person that you're talking to. You want to try and understand the decision-making process. As I mentioned earlier, the buying influence, who gets involved in those kinds of situations. And sometimes you can find out a lot of this stuff before you even go and talk to the customer, which is really good because then you can spend your time on the more fruitful, important questions. So basically the goal here is to get an understanding of the current state. And ideally, you don't want to ask too many of these questions, particularly the stuff that's publicly available, because then you just kind of look silly. So once you've figured out what your situation questions are, you want to go to the problem questions, which is the why. Often if I'm able to get a meeting with someone, I'll ask them, why were you willing to talk to me today? Because that gets them talking about what the problem is. And you want to understand what's causing them pain, what kinds of issues they'd like to be able to solve, and you want to find out if it's something that's painful enough that they actually want to do something about it, right? Because lots of businesses have pain points, but they're not necessarily ones that are important enough that they're prepared to spend any money on solving it. So this is about understanding, as we say here, the actual disease, not the symptom. And one of the ways to get a little bit deeper when you're digging with people is to ask W questions, you know, who, what, when, where, why. Particularly whys, when you're trying to get a sense of why is something a really big issue for someone. Then we go to the implication questions, which is where you're helping the customer to articulate the impact of those problems. What's the impact on the business? What does it mean to you that your conversion rates are only 2%? Those are the kinds of things that you want to do. And if you've done the research in advance, you'll already have an idea, potentially, about what some of the problems are, so you can ask better implication questions. And what you're really trying to do with these is to get the customer to realize that, this is actually a problem that's big enough that I should probably do something about it, right? The challenge here is not to sound like a master of the obvious when you're asking these questions. So that's why we say authenticity is the important thing to remember when you're talking about this. And then finally, you get to the needs-payoff questions, which are the ones that help the customer or the prospect to say, wow, if I could solve this problem, I'd hit all of my key performance indicators. I might make my bonus. My boss would no longer be on my back. I might get promoted or whatever. Right? And again, it comes back to doing some research on the folks. But it's helping to understand the value of the solution and getting to the point where they're actually willing to do something about it. And it's not, this isn't the point where you know, whip out your contract and say, great, let's sign on the dotted line. This is where you really get a chance to work with the customer and talk about how is it we can come up with a solution that would work for you. Okay, so you've identified your ideal customer personas. You know who the buying roles are. You've done your research. You've started to do outreach either on the phone or through your website or with a salesperson, and you're starting to get interest from people. So what do you do next? Any thoughts?
Introduce your solution.
Introduce your solution?
How your products are going to fit and solve all of this.
And at what point in the sales cycle would you do that?
What do you mean?
Well, customers go through a process to buy, right? They all have steps. Whether you know them or not, they all have steps that they go through. So at what step would you start to show them your solution?
I believe this is the last step. After I study what's his complaint, what's his budget, how he's willing to buy or not, and then I have to go back and study again.
I'm sorry, I'm going to make you say that all over again.
And then I have to customize a solution for him. So if I'm able to, because some company, they give a general product or service for everybody. So I believe in customization, be more profitable and more personal. So I believe this is the last part of the selling. After I understand all of the problems, everything around how it change the company of the person's life. That's it.
Okay, great. So hold on to that thought, because what we're talking about is understanding where your customer is in their buying process, and then what kinds of activities you need to do at that point. And part of this is what you need to do in terms of building a funnel or a pipeline. Anybody not heard of that term before? Okay, so we're talking about, as you're trying to build your business, trying to build your sales, you're going to want to build pipeline. You're going to want to have a group of customers or potential customers, prospects that you can talk to, and move them along their process to a close. So every sales organization talks about their funnel or their pipeline. And what's really important is, and if you're entrepreneurs, chances are, and you're starting a business from scratch, you don't have a salesperson yet. If you're the CEO, you're the founder, you are the salesperson. And no one is going to sell your product with as much passion and enthusiasm as you are, because you know it better than anybody else. But when you're the entrepreneur and you're a startup, you're also the chief bottle washer and dishwasher. You look after the office, you do the mail, you do everything. But if you want to build a business, it's essential that you carve out some time to do prospecting. And maybe it's an hour a day or 2 hours a day or 1 day in the week when you do it. But if you don't do it, it's unlikely you're going to get any sales. So it's one of the most important activities you can do in terms of building your business. And we could have a whole other conversation about how you do that and whether you decide that you want to do that through your website and focus on inbound, or whether you want to do outbound with a salesperson or yourself making phone calls. There's lots of different ways to do it, and it's going to depend a lot on the kind of business that you're doing and who your clients are, but there has to be something that you're doing to do that. The other thing, if you do all these prospecting activities, and say your prospecting activity is you decide that this week I'm going to go to a conference because I know that the people who go to that conference are part of my ideal customer profile and I'm more likely to find the buying influences that I want. That's a really effective way to go and meet a whole bunch of people in a short period of time. And you don't even have to spend the money on exhibiting, right? You go as a delegate, you schmooze, you buy people drinks, you talk about stuff, you listen to what's going on, and you give out your business cards. And you come back from your conference and you say, that was awesome, I've got 20 business cards and I got to follow up with all these people. And then you get back into reality and you realize you haven't hit your payroll, you've got to pay the rent or whatever else is going on, you've got to deal with your dev team, and you don't do anything with those 20 business cards, in which case you just wasted your time and their time. So if you're going to spend the time on prospecting, you have to schedule the follow-up time after. Because if you don't do the follow-up, it's a waste. Prioritize the opportunities. Again, when you're first starting out, you might not know what your ideal customer profile is. So you might have, this many contacts or business cards that you've collected through your activity. And as you winnow through them, you'll figure out, these are the ones where it looks like we have the best chance of actually getting a sale. So prioritize those activities. And when you've got limited resources and time, it's important that you're spending them on the ones that are most likely to turn into revenue for you. And then the other thing is to track your wins and your losses. It's just as important to know when you win a deal why you win, as it is important to know when you lose why you lose. Because that you can put back into your product roadmap, into your value proposition, And I would suggest, and you may be, depending on the size of your business where you are, that you look at CRM, customer relationship management, where you can track all that information. There's free CRM systems that are out there that help you manage this stuff. And it's really great to build your database of potential customers and clients. Okay, so basically this comes back to the funnel and what this gentleman was saying here. What you will learn over time is what your particular funnel looks like in terms of what are the steps that you go through with your customers that actually turn into revenue. And it won't be the same for every business, but this is pretty generally what it looks like. It starts at the top. You've got this many opportunities where you do for lead generation, and you've got this many that you need to qualify. And let's talk about qualification for a minute. Does anyone have an idea of what I mean when I talk about qualification? Blake?
Are you actually able to provide the solution for that person's problem?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Can I actually provide the solution? So if I can't provide the solution, let's move along. But if I can provide the solution, there's probably a couple other things you would want to know in order to qualify them. So what else do you think you would want to know about a prospect? Yes?
Are they ever going to pay me?
Yeah, do they have a budget? Exactly, do they have money? And are they prepared to act? And think of one other thing it might be important to know. I'm coming.
Do they actually need my product?
Do they need it? Yeah, that goes back to what we were saying before. If they don't need it, they're not going to buy it. Anybody ever had a situation where you talk to someone and they said, yeah, I'm really interested, that sounds great, and you have ongoing conversations with them for months and months and months and months? Yeah. So you want a timeline as well, right? Because if you don't have some kind of a timeline, then it's hard to prioritize your activities and figure out who you're going to spend your time talking to. The other thing is, if you're talking to someone and they're always interested, they'll always take your call, but nothing really happens, you might want to ask, am I actually talking to the right buying influence? Because you'll always find people who are interested, but people who are interested and prepared to act are the ones where you really want to spend your time. Okay, so you start by generating leads, you qualify them. Do they have a problem that I can solve? Do they have money? Are they willing to act? Is there a reasonable time frame? And then you do the discovery, which is what this gentleman was talking about as well, where you dig deeper and you ask more questions to try and really understand how your solution can meet their business needs. And that's for the customer as well, for them to understand what it is you do and how it can happen. And if you feel that there's a good match, then you usually end up demonstrating your capabilities. And that could be, it could be a demo of your product, it could be a trial, it could be a referral, you show them what somebody else has done. It could be simply you're able to demonstrate, here's our capacity to deliver. So whatever that looks like for your industry, usually there's some kind of demonstration of capabilities. And then hopefully at the end of that, you're actually able to close some business. So this is a very simple example of a funnel. This one only has 5 steps in it. Depending on how complex your business is, it could have 7, it could have 3. Right? But you'll find out more as you go through. Yep.
Yeah, a question which always I have, how you, from your experience, how you are able to distinguish between those who is very nice and they are not willing to buy, and those who is very nice but they are willing to buy in the future, very long future, and those who is very nice and they will buy now.
That's a really, really good question. So,
because, for example, one of the instances I was speaking with a lawyer and he told me, am I wasting my time now? I just hang up with him. I don't need to deal with, because I feel he's pushing now.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, nice segue into the next slide, which is around the lead generation. And one of the things you want to understand, are they ready now? In which case, great, you forge ahead with your process. If they're not ready now, if you have some kind of way of tracking, i.e. a CRM system, or it could be an Excel spreadsheet when you first get started, then you can decide, these might be folks that we want to do what we call nurture. So I know they're going to be ready at some point, but they're not ready today. So how do I not lose track of them? How do I keep them in my pipeline? And what do I do to continue to generate interest? And it could be I make a note that I'm going to touch base with them every 3 months. I'm going to send them an article about something I think they'd be interested in. If I've got a white paper about my solution, I'll send that to them. Or when my website gets up, I'll send them a notification and ask them to go in and check it out. Just things to sort of keep them warm if they're not ready to make a buying decision right now. So those folks can still be golden. It's just a timing issue. So you want to make sure that you stay in touch with them so that when they are ready to make a decision, they'll be thinking of you. And that's part of the lead generation, the qualification, when you actually get someone who might be interested. In terms of the lead generation, part of what you need to determine is how are you actually going to do that? What makes sense for your business? Is it going to conferences? Is it you're going to do your lead gen inbound through your website? You've got forms that they can fill in. They can request a demo, they can request a call, they can download a white paper, something like that. Or are you simply going to work on your own list of contacts and talk to everybody that you know in the particular industry? There's all kinds of ways to do it, but you'll come up with a strategy that says, here's how I'm going to try and generate these leads. And then when you get to them, you do the qualification to really confirm that what you have to offer will solve their business problems. And so this is what we talked about: identified business need, timeline to act, and also some intention to act. And budget, because if they don't have the money, not really a very good lead. And then discovery is where you get to start thinking about all the neat things that you have in your product or service that could help that client. And what you're looking for is for the customer to expand upon the issues they have, the problems they have, so that you mentally can be doing a match between here's what they're saying they need, and here's what I know I can deliver for them. And then finally, when you've done your demonstration that you can do that capability and closing, that's when you start gaining commitment, doing your contracting. Okay? Yep.
One of the things that I've come across in my business in professional services is that even if the person does want to act now, but they don't have the ability to pay for your service, you still don't want to lose that person, but you can also say, well, what is your realistic time frame when you would have this? And then in my case, I can actually suggest ways that they can get towards the payment, like get the finances.
Yep.
And then just keep them going along. And oftentimes they do appreciate that because you've given them some valuable information that they weren't able to figure out on their own, even though it's really to get them towards them to then pay you later on.
Absolutely. So what I hear you talking about is objection handling, and you'll come across objections all the time when you're talking to people, and objections can be really awesome because if you understand what the objection is, then there's an opportunity to, as you say, demonstrate value and also advance your sales cycle. And this is going to sound really old school, but it still works. You know, sometimes someone will say, I'd love to do it, but I can't because of this reason. And if you can give them, if you know you've got a solution for that, then you're in a position to say, well, gee, if we can solve that problem for you, are you willing to move forward? And then you know that you can close on that objection, right? So, and that's also an example of being creative, right? Thinking through what are the different ways. I mean, the more conversations you get in, the more objections you encounter, even if initially you don't know how to handle them, that's awesome because you're learning what those objections are, and then you can start planning for how you address them, and that can have an impact on what you do in that next iteration of your business plan, right? And if you're going through any of the training with New Ventures BC, you know that we're always talking about discovery, discovery, discovery. You can't have too many meetings with customers to try and figure out what your value proposition is, how they buy, what it is they're looking for. Okay. Now, you might think that when you've closed, you're at the end of the sales cycle, but for some of you, you probably haven't. Because once you have a customer, it's much easier to sell to that existing customer and much less expensive, lower cost of acquisition, than to go out and find a new customer. So the last part of the sales cycle that we talk about is account management. So once you've got your client, you've onboarded them with your solution, they've implemented the benefits, they're happy, then you want to be able to sell to them again as you come up with new products or services, or you want to be able to go back to them for referrals to help expand your prospect base. So don't just assume that once you've gotten them and you've closed it that it's over. Then you need to think through, particularly as you get a critical mass of customers, what your overall account management process is going to be. And the reason why that's important is as you grow and as you get more and more customers, you might decide that you need to have a separate function within your company to do the account management. And that's because at some point, most companies decide when they look at sales, do I want my salespeople to be focused on net new business, or do I want them to be looking after existing customers and taking care of and looking for new business? And when you're first starting, you'll probably only have one person or a couple people doing that. And it makes sense when you're growing your business that you might have the same salespeople who are running after new business and taking care of existing customers. And there's some synergy there for those sales folks because they know what their existing customers are doing. They can use them as examples, as case studies, as referrals. But as you grow, you'll probably want to look to do some diversification or dichotomy and have one group that's responsible for customer success, as we call it now, and another who's focused on doing new business. Okay? So basically what that means then is that the funnel, it cycles back. You close the business, you want to come back and make sure that you're mining and you're developing your existing customers, cross-selling or upselling as you develop new products and services. Okay? So that's really the end of my remarks for today. So congratulations, you're now all sales experts. And I'll open up for any questions that you might have. I see a hand shooting up back there.
Okay, so one big problem is that salespeople have a reputation. Like, there are some really bad apples out there who've given all salespeople a really bad reputation, and people wins when they see salespeople. They always associate all salespeople with snake oil salespeople. So how do you cut through that?
Well, I understand what you're saying. I know when I first started my career, I was not in sales. I was in customer service, and everybody in customer service thought the salespeople were awful because they'd sell anything to a customer, they'd tell them stuff that wasn't true, and then it was up to us to take care of it, right? And then when I moved into software, you always had this little dichotomy between the product development group and the sales and marketing group. So that's kind of natural, and there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of tension within the organization. But I think that the most important thing for your sales folks is hire people who are professional and who are authentic and know how to communicate with people and know how to establish rapport with people, right? And I mean, I've certainly met a few not so good salespeople in my career, but I have to say most of the ones I've dealt with have been professional, and they have genuinely cared about what was going on for the customer, because it's very short-sighted if you're a salesperson to not do a good job for your customers, right? People will find out, it'll get around. You don't want to have a lousy reputation in your marketplace. So there's a built-in motivation to do it well. And as you get to a point where you're actually hiring and onboarding salespeople, you can also design things within that compensation that also give them incentive to make sure that they're keeping the customers happy, right? And maybe one of the things to answer your question when you're looking to bring on salespeople is when you interview people, you'll know when you talk to them whether or not that's someone that you would want to buy from, right? So we've all had bad experiences and good experiences. I asked you at the beginning, what was a good experience? So look for that when you're onboarding or hiring salespeople. But probably initially, I mean, if you're just starting your business, you are the salesperson. So you've got no one to blame but yourself.
Excuse me, you mentioned managing your sales funnel, and if you could, do you know of any good software tools that you would recommend or suggest in order to be able to track your funnel?
Yeah, and that's where a CRM, a customer relationship management, comes in. That'll track your funnel, because what you can usually do is set it up so if you've got 5 steps in your sales process, then it'll show you how many customers you have at each point and what the value of that is. I don't know if this is still around, but one that I know people used to use is called Sugar. It was free. I mean, if you Google free CRM software, there's tons of stuff out there. It's a very competitive space. And you can find ones for fairly minimal investment when you get started.
is-
Pipe drive?
Pipe drive is a very good one.
Pipe drive. Thanks.
Newer, and it's relatively inexpensive.
Pipe drive?
Well, $11 a month. But so
Yeah, most of them are, it's all SaaS, so you pay as you go. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, my question was around software as well, but I have another one. For startups or growing companies that are maybe bringing on their first or few salespeople, do you have any resources for the founders on researching and figuring out how to structure comp plans?
I would suggest you talk to your peers. If you Google sales compensation, you'll find tons and tons of stuff. I mean, in my experience, good salespeople are coin operated, so you design the compensation around the activities that you want them to do. And if you're just growing your business, you might have a different compensation program than you'd have if you've been established for 5 years and you've got a whole bunch of customers. So you need to think, what is it that you need them to do, right? Is it that you want them to just generate pipeline and funnel? Do you want them to actually be closing business? Think that through, and then figure out what are the elements that you want to give them incentives on. Yep.
So you have a demo, and it's all good feelings, and you don't talk about price, you don't try to close, you leave the room, and then crickets. You know, what's next? Do you have any hints on how to go from this, collaborative talking about problems to actually pushing them to action?
Sure, and how and when you do the demo it's going to depend on your particular business. Like in our business, we have a documented sales process. We know we start with discovery, we do a technical validation, we do a 14-day managed trial, then we do a proposal, and then we do a close. That's the way we thought it should work. But as we've talked to some of our bigger customers, they don't want to do the trial until they've done the proposal. They want to see the cost first before they engage their own dev resources to connect to our system. So it's going to depend on what it is your customers want. And often, it's sometimes at the beginning of the cycle, the customer will say, that sounds really interesting, but what does it cost? And they have every right to know, but you might not want to give them that information that early in the cycle. So you might want to try and pivot and say something like, I'll be perfectly happy to give you all of the costing information, but before I do, I'd just like to continue the discovery so I know that I'm giving you the cost on the right solution, right? So you want to try and pull it back to, you don't want to give them a price prematurely before you actually know that you can deliver and you've got something of value for them. If they really, really insist, you can always say, well, I don't know for sure because we haven't finished our discovery, but our range would be something like this, right? And give them a range. But you'll learn as you go through it, kind of how it is that people like to buy, and I suggest that you build your sales process around that. So just talk to a lot of customers and find out what steps they go through in terms of making a decision. And it'll depend on what kind of solution are you selling?
Well, I'd be happy to show them the price, because we're competing on price. The problem is, at what point you become a little pushy? Not pushy, but you start talking about actions.
Well, one of the things you can do at the beginning of when you're first doing your initial discovery, one of the things you want to understand is what's their buying process, and you just ask. So what process did you go through the last time you bought something like this? Who gets involved? Okay, and you can say, if we're able to show value, we'll be able to go ahead. You can always qualify them at the beginning, right? And then if you know that your part of your sales process involves a demo, then before the demo you'd say, if the demo is successful, we have the basis for going ahead. So you want to try and set that up in advance. And also, if you've done the work with the customer, at some point they expect you to ask for their business. And if you don't, they wonder, what's wrong? Like, the salesperson, they're supposed to ask me for the business, right? And the worst thing they're going to say is no. And sometimes when they say no, when I was at Xerox, we used to say no is spelled K-N-O-W. They just don't know enough to say yes yet. So how do we help them get to yes?
So talking about the pain, if your product is something that is fairly luxurious or some sort of art, how can you communicate the pain in that case? Because one of the things that I found is most of the pain that we think that we have, they're not actually pains. They just a little like not being comfortable. That's it. So, yeah, how can we communicate the message to that? And what is the pain case that your product is something like an art or something which is fairly luxurious.
So maybe it's a case of wants versus needs, right? And so my boyfriend right now is in the process of looking for a new car, and he's looking for a pretty nice car. So the salespeople are appealing to him as, sir, can you see yourself in this Jaguar? And imagine, driving up to Whistler. It's a different appeal, and so it comes back to understanding who you're talking to, their psychology, what's important to them. I mean, used car salespeople do that all the time. Jewelry salespeople do that kind of stuff all the time as well. So there, it's not so much that they need; it's about the want, and how do you position it in a way that basically appeals to their ego or appeals to their sense of self, or however it is they want to be viewed, right? So get inside the psychology of the people that you're trying to sell to.
Any more questions? Oh, okay.
Maybe you could speak to just the separation between marketing and sales. I think much of what you discussed, there's a marketing portion of it at the top of the funnel.
Yep.
And whether in an early stage venture, it would be possible to have one person wearing both those hats.
It is, and I have been that person, and I did that for a 10-person startup for a while. I was their sales and marketing department. So yeah, you can do that. I mean, sales is actually a subset of marketing, right? So marketing is the strategic perspective. Who are we going to sell to? What is our product? How are we going to sell it? How are we going to price it? And then how we sell it is, sales is just a channel. You might not even have salespeople. You might do all your sales through a website, or you might do it through an ISV or some other kind of a partner. That's part of what you've got to figure out up front. If you're doing your business value map, you'll look to see what are the different ways that you want to actually get your product to market. So you have to be doing both. So I always think of sales as it's a subset of marketing. It's one of the ways that you can get your product to market, but you need to have an overall sort of strategy for how you're going to approach the market and how you're going to service it. So yes, and you can find people who can do both initially. Might be you. Okay, there we go.
If you have a product or feature that is not ready for delivery, would you recommend promoting it just to get ahead of the lead generation? Or would that be setting the expectation too high? Or
you mean, would I recommend selling vaporware?
Well, promoting it mostly just to build up your lead generation and your list of prospects.
I mean, there's situations where you can do that successfully. I think my opinion would be it's easier to do if you already have established and you've got product out there and you're saying to your clients, here's what's coming next. Sign up now. You can be the first one to get it. Might be a little bit trickier if this is your initial product in the market because you haven't already proved that you can do it. But if you've got really tight timelines and you know you're going to be able to deliver, you can also potentially be signing people up, say, be our beta test, or we'd like to do a proof of concept with you, something like that. But I would just be careful because you don't want to promise and then not be able to deliver, because that's hard to recover from.
Okay, one last question.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing all the very informative information. And I'm just having a question, because for salespeople, if you have a great service and great product that will change people's behavior, and but people tend to do things that they used to be doing. So how do you break the fear to let them to try the things? Because there's benefit for them, but people will rather to stay what they used to do.
So what you're saying is, how do you get someone to try a really new solution or something that they haven't done before?
Yes.
Okay. Well, a couple of things. One is when you think about your target market and your customer personas. Who here is familiar with? Sorry, is your product? Is it a technology product? Nope. Okay. It's a bit easier answer when it's technology. Do you have anybody who's currently using it? Yes. Okay. So can you use them as references? Can you ask them who they know who would also benefit, since they took the leap and have presumably seen the benefit? Who else could potentially do it? Might be one way to do it. people often, people will listen to referrals from friends and folks that they, that they respect. And I think I'm out of time.
So. All right, thank you very much, Christine.
Thanks, everybody.